Let's start with the big picture sort of team rankings. Let's take a look at where we're standing right now. Andrew, why don't you sort of talk us through some of the stuff that stands out to you about what we've got here at the top?
Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame, number one right now, and that's weighted heavily by the fact that they got 18 commitments. I don't think there's any other school with more than 11. Obviously, you got LSU, Penn State, Clemson right there with 11. I think the other thing, maybe a lot, your common or casual college football fan seeing the Tigers at 3 is a bit surprising. I love what they're doing on the recruiting trail here. I think Dabo going outside of his coaching tree, hiring Matt Luke, hiring Nick Eason, Chris Rump, that has not been talked about enough. Those guys have done an excellent job on the recruiting trail. And then Brian Kelly in the Tigers sitting at number 2. They got the number 1 quarterback in the country committed, the number 1 wide receiver in the country committed. And then, you can make a case that their running back is running back 1. And then finally, Ohio State, their class, they have 2 5-star cornerbacks committed. I continue to get asked on the 24/7 Sports airways, like, this is the best cornerback duo since when? I don't even know if it's been done before. They got 2 top 10 corners committed. Top 10 players nationally, and they both play cornerback.
Decent. I want to talk about the Irish here a little bit. I go down this list. Everybody has a famous dad who played in the league. Like, this is kind of crazy. Plaxico Burress's kid, Jerome Bettis's kid, Ike Taylor. This is a seriously good class for Notre Dame, and I know it's certainly propped up by volume, but I think we also have to be fairly impressed by the quality of player they're getting.
Yeah, and I think Marcus Freeman, what has he done since he's taken over for Brian Kelly? I think he has rebuilt that quarterback room, and they've gone and they've gotten transfers, but the guys they've got from the high school ranks, we're really fired up about. Kenny Minchie 2 cycles ago. This past cycle, it was CJ Carr, grandson of Lloyd Carr. A lot of people thought he would go to Michigan. And then here in the 25 cycle, they have this kid Deuce Knight committed out of Mississippi. I think he is the biggest wild card of the 2025 quarterbacks. He's a lefty. He can run. He's got a 40-inch vertical jump. It's like one of the highest I've ever seen for a quarterback. So he has revitalized that room in terms of the balance between experience and then potential. The floor and the ceiling continues to rise. And then on those NFL legacies, I'm going to start calling Notre Dame like NFLU. And I don't know if this is by design, that the Irish have gone after all these like high profile, like legacy kids. I do think their evaluation process and the guys they are targeting, it feels a little bit different than when Brian Kelly was there. But I think Notre Dame, it appeals to a lot of these former NFL players. Those guys are in locker rooms. They see guys from all different parts of the country. And I think the Notre Dame brand stands out to guys that have been in the league. And, Jerome Bettis's kid, Ike Taylor's kid, Plaxico Burress's kid. There's just a lot of them there. And they're all high floor, high IQ football players. So it's a really good recruiting class. And there's still some big fish out there for Notre Dame.
We're watching Burress's kid here on the screen right now. Like, he even kind of glides like Dad did. It's just smooth and just the soft hands. That's awesome, man. I'm curious to see, like, Notre Dame. The question has been, like, can they win on like the top 10, top 15 level prospect down the stretch? But I don't think there's any doubt that Freeman is bringing in more of those like top 247 kids than Brian Kelly did. So like I do see like some improvements from them statistically in the recruiting thing. And I think like the Irish fans in our chat, that's basically just like, can they land that like top 10 kid down the stretch? A Keon Keeley 2 cycles ago, right?
And I think that, the expanded 12 team, or is it a 14 team playoff now? I can't keep track. I think Notre Dame's kind of like, I don't steal a March Madness phrase. Like, I think every season they're kind of on the bubble, right? Going in, like you would have them as a contender to get a playoff spot. So what happens if they do break through into the playoff? Does that unlock them and allow them to get, a 5-star, one of the top 32 players in the country? I think Notre Dame's done a good job recruiting and building out the back end of that roster. But like you said, bringing in the 4-star prospects, the guys that can play and make an impact, be multi-year starters. I mean, they are elevating that roster, and they're adding talent through the transfer portal as well. It's been a good balance, a good mix. Rattle off some 10-win seasons, 12-win seasons. Maybe they do get a Keon Keeley. Maybe that is the answer for them.
Danny, what do you remember about the Notre Dame mystique from NFL locker rooms?
Similar to Michigan. I think there's definitely, we're special, we're different than everybody else. There's a little bit of an arrogance too. But definitely even more so, I'd say, with Notre Dame, just because of the historical aspect of it. It's because it's not, especially now, like regionally, it's not attractive to go there and play. It's cold. It's in the middle of nowhere. So they really have to sell a lot of that tradition. But now they're able to sell success too. I think a lot of this is direct result. Talking about the Marcus Freeman is one of the more impressive dudes you'll talk to. Like this is no surprise that former players would be attracted to him. I mean, Jerome Bettis is like that makes a ton of sense. But some of these other guys, like the reason they're sending their kids there and entrusting them, I think it's because of Marcus Freeman and what he brings to the table.
I just think it's a good school. I think about the children of athletes who I knew. I tell you where they weren't going to, the same schools I was going to. They were placed in opportunities that were different, and being at Notre Dame is different. So it's like, that's where, if you are, you have all of this NFL success, you've had the success that comes with that. You can provide some opportunities for your kid. And if you can, if you still believe in the educational and the college experience, Notre Dame's probably a place that's pretty attractive to you.
Only one thing I want to push back on what you said, Danny, where you said Notre Dame's in the middle of nowhere. I would agree that for the most part, Indiana as a state is the middle of nowhere, but South Bend's like an hour drive away from Chicago. So it's like, if you want to go have fun on a weekend, you're not exactly far away from it.
Yeah, shout out to St. Patrick's Day and the Chicago Bears trading Justin Fields on St. Patrick's Day in Chicago. What in the world?
The fights.
All things Green River. All right. All right. So we were talking a lot about the boom in Tuscaloosa when you know that Caden Proctor is going to be returning. Andrew, what is your sense of Kalen DeBoer, this staff, which underwent changes, even as Ryan Grubb's sitting there, 3 days before signing day, I am your offensive coordinator. Then you have to rework the staff again and rework the staff again. How do you think that group, as it stands right now, is looking in the 2025 cycle?
I think Bud kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in the show about Alabama getting aligned with the people that support the program. Look, when DeBoer was hired, I think for me and a lot of my colleagues, the question was, all right, how is he going to handle recruiting in the state of Alabama? More importantly, in this kind of like new look SEC. Remember Hugh Freeze as at Auburn. You got Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss, a ton of excitement there. And DeBoer is a guy that's recruited on the West Coast. We know he's X's and O's scheme. He's going to scheme you up. He's going to win football games, but he's never really had these magical recruiting classes at the upper levels of the college football sport. So I wanted to see, all right, what's he going to do? And when Nick Saban retired, that 2025 recruiting class, I thought it was a kind of a shoo-in to be the number one class in the country. I mean, they had a ton of guys committed. Well, most of those guys backed off their pledges. So DeBoer coming in from Washington, where there's not a ton of crossover in terms of the targets you're recruiting at Alabama, it was kind of like, what's going to happen? And I think coming out of this dead period in February, I'm feeling good about Alabama and Crimson and the Crimson Tide in terms of what DeBoer's got in place. He's hired a ton of veteran coaches, guys with experience in the SEC. Right now, they're sitting 13th in the rankings. This is normally where Alabama and Nick Saban are at this stage in the cycle. I always say Nick Saban takes the car out of the garage and then he puts it in drive, May, June, July. That's when they kind of load up on commitments. And I think for DeBoer, it's going to be similar. They just got a big win. Derek Smith, a two-way athlete out of the Yellowhammer State, could be a safety, could be a wide receiver. That was a big one. He's a top 64 prospect for us, a guy that we really, really like. And then he went into the DMV and got another kind of two-way athlete. I think they're going to play him at defensive back. And just talking with some of the guys in our network, at our Alabama site, Brett Greenberg. It sounds like Alabama's going to have some fireworks here over the next few days. Darrell Johnson, a top 247 linebacker out of Georgia. He's going to make a commitment this afternoon on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Alabama leads on the crystal ball. I think that's a massive win for the Crimson Tide if he does pick them. Talked with Darrell Johnson a few months ago. I think it was back in January at a camp outside of Atlanta. He didn't even talk about Alabama. It was all Florida State, Tennessee, these other schools. So Alabama's kind of figuring it out real fast. And I'm excited to see how this class comes together over the next few months. And then what happens on the field, because I think a lot of recruits are going to be looking at Tuscaloosa to see, all right, are they going to win games? Are they still going to get me to the NFL? Because when Nick Saban was there at Alabama, that was a big sell. You go there, you're going to go likely be a day 1, day 2 NFL draft pick, and you're going to get paid in the league.
You mentioned Clemson hiring Nick Easton and Rump, and it's showing up in their recruiting immediately. Like their top three recruits are all defensive linemen. Like this is a group you got to be pretty. I know Clemson's like done the best job of producing defensive linemen in the ACC for a while, but like this is a really nice group they're putting together.
Yeah, I mean, I love the defensive line class, but how about the offensive line class? Matt Luke, that hire has not been talked about enough. We know the Tigers aren't going to go in the transfer portal under the direction of Dabo. So the margin for error is so slim. Like they have to volume shoot on their offensive linemen, and they have to hit on a lot of them, and they got to play these guys early. The one recruit I kind of have circled, all right, is Clemson going to get this guy? Is David Sanders Jr., our number 1 ranked offensive tackle, number 2 player in the country. Talking with a few different people, he wasn't even considering Clemson until Matt Luke was hired. I think the Tigers are in the driver's seat right now, and they're going head-to-head with Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina. You know, all the big programs want David Sanders. He's a lean offensive tackle. Kind of reminds me of Charles Cross, who was at Mississippi State. Now he's with the Seattle Seahawks. It's going to take some time, but this is a franchise or team-changing type of player. And he's visited Death Valley 3 times already this spring. Rule of thumb in recruiting, kind of follow the visit. So if they can reel him in, I feel really good about the direction that Clemson is heading here. And I think a lot of people are selling stock. Look, I get it. I mean, there's been some struggles. You know, they're not in the transfer portal like everyone else, but I really like the class they have. I liked what they signed last cycle. And the thing is, I think a lot of these guys can play early, and they have to do that there for the Tigers because there is no veteran coming in. Like next man up is normally a freshman for the Tigers.
Have you seen the clips of him running routes? David Sanders? Dude, he is one of the best athletes on his team, like regardless of position. I know he's close to 300 pounds.
So I do a freaks list every year, like the freakiest recruits. It's kind of like Feldman with his college football players. It's not as in depth. I don't got a bunch of agents telling me different things and strength coaches.
You don't retweet it.
Agents tell Ivins.
It's more me doing the legwork. But David Sanders is like absolutely a lock. I mean, over 50 feet in the shot put. He, as a junior, he was protecting Jaden Davis, the quarterback that signed with Michigan. He was his left tackle. Played like the entire season with a torn labrum, but he also went 2 ways, played defensive end. And I think like if he just built himself as a pass rusher, he would be a top 247 defensive end for us. I had a college staffer at an SEC program be like, he'd be a top 5 D end on our board. Power cleans 315. He's got like a swimming background. I mean, he just is a box checker for us. So he's an elite talent. And I'll never forget the first time I saw him, Bud. It was at that FBU freshman All-American game like 3 years ago. I'm like, who is this kid? And he's panned out and continued to progress.
There's a little bit, he's not as wide and he's not as thick at the same age, but there's a little bit of like the Amarius Mims thing where it's just like, holy cow. Like if you just stay healthy for 3 years of college ball, like it's hard to see a guy with that body and that ability, like assuming he develops at least a little bit, like not be a top half of the draft type pick. I mean, it's just there's not a guy like that in every single class. Even it's not like, oh, who's this year's David Sanders? Maybe last year there wasn't a David Sanders.
Well, I mean, all the NFL media drooled and scouts over Amarius Mims at the combine. It's kind of the same thing with David Sanders. I mean, it's a height, weight, speed game. What can you do? And when you look at our rankings at 24/7 Sports, we're going to push those guys up the board, right? Those are the guys that are going to get selected early on, and David Sanders is certainly in that same category.
No doubt.
When was our last update of the player rankings?
Two, 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Take us through some of the top quarterbacks. So what does that picture look like in terms of some of the players who are at the top here as we're still going into the camp cycle that they'll have this summer?
Right. So I've built it as like the big four, and you got Bryce Underwood at the top. He's a kid out of the Detroit area. He's the most decorated signal caller of the bunch. I mean, he's 40-2 as a starter, 3-year kid. He can beat you with his arm. He can beat you with his legs. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. I've been looking for a player comp. And he reminds me a little bit of Deshaun Watson. Like, that's the guy I've settled on. He is headed to LSU. It was a big win for Brian Kelly and Joe Sloan. I think the fact that they had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and Jaden Daniels certainly helped push Bryce Underwood towards Baton Rouge. So sounds like he's locked in. He's the real deal. He's the most decorated of the bunch. The guy number 2 behind him in this big four is Tavian St. Clair, who was committed to Ohio State, which, I'm sure everyone's familiar with all the quarterback talent.
Yeah, I was going to say, where are the snaps in Columbus for all these dudes?
Yeah, and you got to give Ryan Day and his staff there a tip of the cap, because Tavian St. Clair was an excellent evaluation for him. He's from a smaller town in Ohio, and I did this mistake right when we were going through the junior seasons. I accidentally watched the last game of Tavian St. Clair's sophomore year, and I'm like, whoa, this is his sophomore season. So I followed it up watching the last game of his junior year. Completely different quarterback. He too has an imposing frame. I think he's very accurate to all 3 levels on the move. And, kudos to them for getting this kid committed before really the rest of the country found out about him. I mean, he was a kid that went to the summer camps there. So, yeah, they got Julian Sayin, Aaron Nolan, and Tavian St. Clair behind all those other guys. I mean, we loved Lincoln Kineholtz 2 cycles ago. So Tavian St. Clair is 2. Checking in at 3, George McIntyre out of the Nashville area. He is committed to Tennessee. This is a 6'5" tower, and I think he does not get enough credit for how he gets away from sacks. Like, he is 6'5", but he's kind of a magician back there with his stride. Spins out, spins away from sacks, evades pressure. His team won just 2 games as a junior, and like, we're all scratching our head. I'm like, how did they only win 2 games? And then you dig into the tape, and it's not George's fault. I mean, the defense was giving up like 35 points a game. They were averaging over 30. It's kind of one of the great wonders of the world how they only won 2 games. But I think he's a perfect fit for Josh Heupel's offense. Everyone's going to know Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee after this upcoming season. I think there's some similarities between him and George McIntyre in terms of how quickly they can get the ball out and how they can attack the deeper third. So, he always wanted to be at Tennessee. He's committed there. I think he's going to stick. And then the fourth one in this quote unquote big four, Julian Lewis out of Georgia. He was a kid that was in the class of 2026, reclassified to 2025. He is committed to USC. I'm doing that in quotation marks because he has taken a ton of visits, right? He's one of these guys that is committed, but also has a top 5. I mean, he's been to Colorado and Indiana. I think both of those are kind of interesting, but really, Georgia, Auburn, some of those programs. He's the best pure distributor of the football, in my opinion, in this class, even after reclassifying. And, I've done the homework. I've done the data. Reclassification isn't going away in college football. I know it's been a thing for a while in the world of college basketball, but with the NIL deals and all that, it's a race now to get to college. And the guys that have done it, it really hasn't panned out. I mean, JT Daniels is a name that comes to mind. But if you take Julian Lewis, you take his numbers, what he has done in Georgia's highest classification, it stacks up there with all these other 2025 quarterbacks. The big knock on him, he's not as physically gifted as those other quarterbacks ahead of him. Think of like Bryce Young. I mean, he's on the smaller side. So, that's the reason he's QB4 for us. But man, he can spray it around. I think he can play in a Lincoln Riley type of offense, up tempo, want him to be a point guard. He's going to be one where there's going to be a ton of twists and turns here over the next few months because he's taking visits.
I would think that like the reclass thing, especially for quarterbacks, I think that has to have a huge impact just because of lack of experience of playing. If you're leaving kind of a year early, I think that some positions you would probably see long-term it would work out better at. But I think like the QB position is a really difficult spot to do that.
Well, I mean, look towards the NFL draft right now. Brock Purdy has obviously turned some heads. And if you kind of follow the NFL draft media and the scouts and the guys that are plugged in, you keep hearing that front offices want, if you're going to take quarterbacks in these later rounds, they want guys that have played a ton of games, that have seen a ton of different scenarios and a ton of different situations. And I think that applies to these quarterbacks coming out of high school. You reclassify, you're missing out on a 12, 13, 14, 15 game season. You don't get those live reps back. Yeah, you're going to go learn your offense at the school of your choice. Hopefully the OC doesn't leave for another job, but you're not getting live game reps. I mean, normally you're running the scout team for that time. So yeah, I mean, Quinn Ewers did it, went to Ohio State. Now he's finding success at Texas. Jake Bentley a couple years ago, he bounced around from school to school. It's interesting. Austin Simmons was another. He jumped 2 years to leave and go to Ole Miss, and he hasn't appeared in a game yet, but he's playing baseball for them. I would agree with you, Tom. Quarterback, you definitely want them to get as many starts as you can. And the good thing for Julian Lewis is I think he's already got like 28 of them under his belt, and he's got another year to play.
The one question I have about the reclass thing, because I agree with you. Like the data is really kind of scary. Does it matter if they were a redshirt kid who is then sort of reclassifying up to the age appropriate year, right? Like Quinn Ewers did this and is going to be a hit, but Quinn Ewers would have been a 19-year-old high school senior, right? So he
was like old for his grade in fifth grade. But
yeah. Whereas Julian Lewis, he doesn't turn 17 until September 21st, based on what I was able to do. So like he actually is. Like his college career, like he will like just have turned 18. So like it's 18 to 21 in theory, whereas Ewers is a little bit older than that. So I wonder, because like a lot of these quarterback dads do like the sports redshirt thing at some point, and are they reclassifying to the age appropriate like year once they realize, hey, I'm actually pretty good, and do we think that matters, like as far as the extra year of actual like physical age?
Well, I do think the age is a big thing. I mean, it is in other sports, right? If you talk to guys that scout hockey and baseball and all that stuff, it's a big deal. I'll say this on the age thing: we're getting into these 2026 rankings, so that would be soon to be high school juniors. A lot of old kids, a lot of older birthdays. And you want to know why? It's because of the pandemic. And I don't think you can blame, families for maybe holding their kid back instead of doing online school or whatnot for an extra year, or just missing out on a year of sports. I'm noticing that as a trend in these upcoming rankings. A lot of red numbers.